Hey gamers, it's G from the corner, and today we're going to be checking out Capcom Fighting Collection 2. This has been one of my most anticipated games of 2025, at least coming from the start of the year. You know, there's been plenty announced for Nintendo Switch 2 and other consoles and stuff that I'm just very, very excited for coming out in the next little while, but this game was one that's been at the back of my mind for quite some time. For being just a simple collection of a handful of fighting games, I've been very, very excited for it. And it has taken quite a while for it to come out. Not really sure what was up with that. Usually collections like this, even the ones in the same series, this Capcom Fighting Collection series that was started a few years back, they only take like 4 months from reveal to release, but this was announced back in the August Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase. We didn't see it again until the following February, where they confirmed it was coming out in May. That is quite a while, and honestly, I kind of lost interest for a little bit there, and then interest picked back up. It was a bit of high and low on my excitement. I kind of wanted it at a certain point in the year, kind of didn't want it at another point, but you know what? After all this, I think it's come at the exact time that I needed it. We are less than 2 weeks away from the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 at the time of this recording, and the game dropped about 3 weeks before the console releases, so this is going to be my last Switch game, essentially. This is the last physical Switch game I'm picking up to be played on my Nintendo Switch console after 8 years, and you know what? It's kind of emblematic of a lot of things on this system, you know? For one, the incredible quality of legacy content on the Nintendo Switch. Some of the games in here have never been re-released, and they are massive, massive fighting games that have gone down as all-time classics. They're preserved in such high quality, and some of the games in this collection are being touted as the definitive versions of said games. So, yeah, you know what? I think this is a pretty damn good game to exit the Nintendo Switch generation with. But with that all said, what are we doing here? You know, Capcom Fighting Collection 2, what's this review gonna be? What am I here to really talk about with this collection? Kind of just want to gush for a little bit. Honestly, it's a quality product, and I highly recommend it to anyone, especially at the price that it is being sold for. This is a definitely worth it title to pick up. Heck, if you're buying a Switch 2 at launch, I'd probably say get this over getting Street Fighter 6, which might sound crazy, but, you know, honestly, I think this is a definitely worth it experience for some people. It's also cheaper than Street Fighter 6. That's another point there. So let's begin with the individual games that are featured in this collection. Now, despite the classic status of some of these games, this is actually my first time playing quite a few of them, and I gotta say, thoroughly impressed by the vast majority of them. For one, we've got the big headliners here, Capcom vs. SNK Pro and Capcom vs. SNK 2. I'm not saying the subtitles, man, they're too big, but these are iconic team fighters featuring characters from Capcom and SNK fighting games. Capcom and SNK have had a pretty strong relationship in the last few years, both exchanging guest characters in their biggest current fighting games. But, you know, seeing these games re-released is definitely very exciting for a lot of people, and getting to try these games out, mostly for the first time, I've dabbled in CVS2 once or twice before, has been quite a treat. The first game, Capcom vs. SNK Pro, kind of controls more like an SNK game, I say, because it is a 4-button fighter as opposed to a 6-button one. You can choose if you want to play in Capcom or SNK style. Essentially, imagine Puyo Puyo Tetris, but it's a fighting game. There's not that much different to the grooves in this game, more so just how you use your supers and such, but the actual mechanics are shared between all grooves. The roster is pretty alright. It's mostly Street Fighter and King of Fighters, but there are a few extra characters thrown in there, and you know what? I kind of like it. It's kind of a cozy roster, even though, yes, there's no Mega Man, there's no Resident Evil, none of that, but I kind of like it quite a bit, honestly. The sequel is where things really get amped up, though. Capcom vs. SNK 2 expands the roster to include not too many more, but just a handful of other Capcom and SNK characters that don't really fit in the roster. You know, like, here's a character from The Last Blade. Here's more Street Fighter characters. Here's 2 characters from Final Fight. Like, you know what? Honestly, they're pretty cool additions. The groove system is back, but now there are, like, 6 different ones, and they're all based on different games. I'm a K-groove enjoyer, personally speaking. The ratio system, which I failed to mention, that was used to build teams before, has now been turned into the free ratio system. If I pick 3 characters, I can make one of them worth more. If I pick 2, I can make one of them worth 3 points, or both of them worth 2 points. You get the picture. But above all else, and especially for someone like me who is very much a casual fighting game enjoyer, the style of Capcom vs. SNK 2 is just immaculate. The music, the stages, these are some of the best stages in any traditional fighting game ever. Just, oh my gosh, the Arctic stage where you're just fighting on the side of a glacier and like a huge Titanic-sized cruise ship pulls up and a bunch of people show up to watch the match halfway through. That Japanese festival stage with the big floats for E Honda and Hamaru just taunting you in the background. Fantastic stages all around. The music's great too. The New York and London stages, I mean, they're iconic for a reason, right? In fact, in this collection, there is actually a full remix soundtrack for the game. Like, wow. Wow, they're like the whole soundtrack just got a full remix with Capcom's current sound team. And, most of it's pretty good. Some of it's unfortunately the London Stages remix is, in my opinion, not very good, but some of it is really good. Happiness and Stimulation, my two favorite songs from the original game, got insane remixes that I'm sure I'm playing in the review somewhere. So yeah, CVS2 is kind of the hero game of this collection. This is the game that everyone will be playing online, even weeks, months, years after this thing releases. But what about the rest of the oddballs here? Unlike some other collections like the Marvel collection, where the hero game, Marvel 2, is very clearly the best game in the collection, and you're not really going to be going back to the other games unless you're some fighting game historian, the games in here are all very interesting and different. We got Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper, a version of Alpha 3 released in arcades after the console version that includes many of the characters that were console exclusive. It's kind of a definitive sprite-based Street Fighter game in some ways. You've got all the characters from 2 Turbo and, of course, plenty of the characters from Alpha, right? There's a lot here, and they're all pretty cool. And it's a pretty fun feeling Street Fighter game. I'm definitely not good at it, though. I've gotten my ass beat by every single person I've played online. I like quite a few of the characters in it, though. Armika, Cammy, and Sakura all feel great in this game. There's different isms you can use to determine how your supers will work. The custom combo system is interesting, but I've never really gotten the hang of it myself. It's a fun Street Fighter. If you're looking for the Street Fighter of this collection, they definitely could have picked worse. A third strike version that doesn't have horrendous input delay would be lovely, but I feel like they're going to save that for whatever the next Capcom fighting collection is. Moving on, we have some of the 3D fighters in this collection. That was something that I was definitely very much immediately enthralled by. You could even watch in the reaction video. And they knew to kind of hide that until they were going down the games list, because they don't show any footage of these games, but then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, Project Justice and Plasma Sword are here. And I think both games are absolutely fantastic. Plasma Sword is a very simple fighting game, in my opinion. There's a lot of mechanics and things going on in it, but it's a 3-button fighter with a sidestep button, and all supers are performed with very simple inputs. It's not a very tough game to learn. It's definitely one that I feel like I can bring around to friends and they will get a kick out of immediately. The sci-fi theming is also very different and unique from Capcom's usual fare. Apparently, the game was originally supposed to be a Star Wars fighting game, but Lucasfilm turned down the idea, but Capcom went ahead with it anyway. This is actually the sequel to a title called Star Gladiator, which, yeah, okay, makes sense. You play the game, you definitely get the Star Wars vibe going on, but it isn't really quite Star Wars. It feels good, though. It definitely, gets that vibe, and it's, the closest thing to a good Star Wars fighting game we'll probably ever get. So yeah, no, definitely fun. But Project Justice, on the other hand, is quite a bit more technical. It's a tag fighter, but not quite. You can't switch out to your other characters mid-round, but you can switch in between rounds. You also will be able to use them for these team-up attacks that cost meter. So you're trying to build your team around who you want to play as and which team attacks you want to use. Tiffany's is great because she kisses you and then it heals your health. I don't know why you're just allowed to heal for 2 meter in this game, but sure, why not? I'll take it. I'm not complaining. The game also feels very, I guess not really floaty is the right word, but definitely high energy. You'll punch a dude and they'll fly all the way up into the air, and you'll then jump up for an air combo and knock them right back down. The game definitely has a really good sense of impact to it, and a lot of the characters have very fun movesets. You got Roy over here who's like knockoff rich boy Terry Bogard. You got a character who's supposed to be a swimmer. The entire game takes place across a few high schools, so characters all kind of fall into standard teenager stereotypes, and it leads to a very fun and dynamic roster that, is very inviting and engaging to people. You're not going to get your usual fighting game fare here. You're going to see the soccer player dude and be like, I want to play as Mr. Soccer Man, or you're going to see the tennis girl and be like, I wonder how she plays, Very fun stuff like that. The game's got a story mode and a kind of just free arcade mode. The story mode has a bunch of cutscenes and stuff. It's very much in depth for an arcade game, even at the time. But yeah, no, definitely a highlight here. But now we get into where my opinion seems to differ from the masses. Power Stone and Power Stone 2. Okay, so this is the Capcom Fighting Collection, and all the games in here are fighting games. Power Stone and Power Stone 2 get here on a technicality. They are more so party games. They have an arena fighter sort of gimmick. You'll run around trying to collect stones to power up your character. The first game still has some hallmarks of a traditional fighter. It's a 1v1 game. You're kind of just in these stationary environments, although all the stages do have their own layouts and mechanics and gimmicks. And, they're fun, they're interesting. I enjoy quite a few of them, but the second game just goes completely off the deep end. It's a 4-player game now. All the stages are scrolling until a certain point. Like, there's a lot going on in this game, and honestly, maybe a little too much. I kind of prefer the first game overall, but I don't really prefer either game that much compared to the rest of the fare in this collection. I think the movement's just a bit too slow for me. Like, it's cute, it's fun, but I'm not going to sit here and call this an all-time classic, at least personally. I'm happy that they're back. A lot of people definitely love these games, and, I'm so happy for all of them, but this isn't exactly my cup of tea, which leaves us with game number 8, the final game in this collection, and easily the most questionable inclusion, Capcom Fighting Evolution. It is not a good video game. This game was scrabbled together when a team of SNK employees who joined Capcom got their project canceled because of poor testing reception. So they just kind of made a fighting game with a bunch of old assets and didn't even bother changing the characters to mesh together. Remember how I said Capcom vs. SNK 2 had 6 different grooves? Well, this game also has 6 different grooves, except you can't select each groove for each character. Each character has 1 groove. So you could play a character from Street Fighter 2 who just can do supers, or you could play a character from Street Fighter 3 who's able to parry. It's really, really stupid. Honestly, the best part about this game being in the collection is that the game has been preserved for future generations, and that they get to use characters like Dimitri and the dinosaur from Red Earth on the promo material for this collection. But yeah, I mean, hey, there are 5 games here that I want to come back to pretty frequently. 2 games that are definitely interesting, not my personal cup of tea, but I can see why people love them, and 1 game that is flat out bad, and pretty much everyone seems to agree as such. Overall, it's a fantastic collection, though. Again, I cannot deny how strong Capcom vs. SNK 2, Alpha 3 Upper, Plasma Sword, and Project Justice are as games in this collection. Like, these games completely justify the $40 US asking price all on their own. But back to the whole collection aspect of this collection. How are these games preserved and put together? Well, there's no emulation issues whatsoever, at least as far as I can tell. There's pretty low latency. I'm not noticing any excruciatingly painful input delay in this collection. And there's plenty of borders and filters you could choose from. As per usual, there's I think 7 or 8 filters for every game that, mimic different kinds of CRTs and monitors, which is cool. There's 4 different borders or no border. If you're that kind of person, you can change the screen size to a million different options. You can even change the in-game resolution. All these games rendered at 480p originally, but a lot of them are 3D games. So if you just turn up the resolution, you can get a much clearer image that more so reflects what your console of choice that you're playing this thing on is actually capable of. That's cool. Here's what's not cool. For one, the gallery is nice. There's a lot of cool artwork to view in it, but, it's kind of annoying how you can't really zoom in super far on a lot of it. I know that's very minuscule, but bigger point, why can't I just, pick artwork from a list of options? There's, almost 200 pieces of art in some of these galleries. Why do I have to scroll through each one individually just to find a specific piece? That's kind of dumb. Here's my biggest complaint, though, with the collection. The previous 2 Capcom fighting collections included a kind of epilepsy-free mode, a seizureless mode, if you will. They turned down a lot of those crazy flashing lights, and I don't think it really does that much to help people who have intense cases of epilepsy. I don't have epilepsy myself, so I couldn't tell you if these are good fixes or not. But they do personally help me. I mean, playing, some of the older Street Fighters and Darkstalkers games on the previous collections without, constant white flashes. It was good, it made the games more playable. But none of those features are present here. And I'm going to be honest, some of these games don't really need it. Personally speaking, I mean, okay, from my perspective anyway, Project Justice, Plasma Sword, Capcom vs. SNK 2, they're fine. They don't have a bunch of crazy flashes, but there are still games on this collection that do have some. Alpha 3 Upper has constant white flashes whenever you make big hits, and I mean, I get the dramatic effect, but we already established that these suck. I don't understand why they couldn't have gone into the emulator to fix these problems, but oh well. At least Alpha 3, I think, would have, deserved it, considering, that's pretty obtrusive. Some of the backgrounds are also kind of obtrusive as well, on the Osaka Tower stage in CVS2. I know, again, very nitpicky things. There's definitely, ways for me personally to dodge these issues. And, for people who are suffering from epilepsy, how much does turning down the flashiness on an old game that's already pretty flashy as its kind of like, selling point, how much does that really affect them? I don't know. I'm just kind of miffed the option isn't here, especially for, again, Alpha 3 upper. But aside from that, I think this is a fantastic collection. If you have even a passing interest in old Capcom fighting games, this comes highly, highly recommended. I think it's a great game to pull out with friends and just, have some fun, play in a few Capcom fighting games, play some CVS2, some Project Justice, some Power Stone if that's your thing. I think this is honestly one of the best collections ever released, truly. And, I'm playing this collection on the Nintendo Switch, and thinking back to, when these collections started coming out, before then, the 30th anniversary collection, Ultra Street Fighter 2 was, sold for the same price on the Switch. This is just Street Fighter 2 with, a motion control mode and updated visuals and music. There's not much really in that collection. It's kind of lame, honestly. And comparing it to even the first Capcom fighting collection, which just included Street Fighter 2 as one of the games in the collection, it's insane how far we've come here. It's kind of nice that some of these companies are realizing that people want to replay their not really obscure games, but at least not as majorly successful games like Project Justice and Plasma Sword, right? And also are doing so at a reasonable price. We're getting a bunch of 2000s fighting games bundled together for $50. This is where we're at now. These games are losing their value and they are going to be more accessible for future generations. And that's really, really cool. I'm super pumped to see another Capcom fighting collection. Other companies do the same thing. It's kind of sad that just Capcom does this. Why don't we get old Mortal Kombats or old Tekkens re-released constantly? That's kind of unfortunate. I don't really know where else Capcom can really go with the fighting collection thing. Obviously there's the Street Fighter EX games, the JoJo's fighting game. We need a version of Third Strike that doesn't have terrible input delay, right? But, who knows? Maybe Capcom Fighting Collection 3 is in the cards. Maybe it's not. Even so, this is a fantastic collection. Easily the best of these Capcom Fighting Collections. One of the best collections you can get on Switch in general. And I highly, highly recommend this if you want some good fighting game fun with some friends or family. But that's going to do it for today. Keep yourselves cornered for more gaming goodness, more Capcom fighting game goodness, more Nintendo goodness, gaming goodness in general. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.